But let's dive into the next thing in our toolkit. And the next thing in our toolkit to improve performance, we're going to look at the topic of low heart rate and does this equal better results? So heart rate training and volume is quite a popular topic. You'll see it online. You'll see it spoken about in podcasts. This figure highlights some of the commonly used training zones from zone 1 to 5. And you can also see this figure has a 3-zone model as well, or a triphasic model. And the key element to consider here is our heart rate range for each zone, and in particular, the intensity where the heart rate falls below our aerobic threshold, which is our V2-1. And I'll show this on this next figure. So our aerobic threshold is typically where we go from our easier heart rate to more of our moderate or higher intensity heart rates. And there is some science behind that. But that's the important bit when we consider our training models and how coaches and athletes will often distribute their intensity of training. Now, there's multiple models and they look at different distributions, and I'm going to break down 3 of the really key ones and then tell you about the science behind which ones improve performance and what the evidence says. So first one, let's look at polarized training. Now, polarized training is probably what you've heard out there if you have heard people talk about 80-20 training. And polarized training typically breaks up your training volume. So for example, your total time or your total kilometers in a week into roughly 80% in zone 1 and 2, so our easier heart rate training, a small amount in zone 3, so our middle zone training, or typically known as our threshold training, and then up to 20% in zone 4 and 5, so our higher heart rate zones. Now, we'll come to the science in a moment, but if we contrast that, another model of training is called pyramidal training. And this is similar. However, the difference is, while we've still got a large amount in zone 1 and 2, so 70-odd%, we have a higher amount in our middle zone or our threshold zone, so 20-odd%, and then you've got 10% in zone 4 and 5. So a little bit in that higher intensity zone. And then we contrast that with another popular model, threshold training. Now, threshold training is typically around where you're getting, say, 45 to 60%, let's call it 50% in those lower heart rate zones, another 40 to 60%, so call it 50-odd% in our threshold zone, and not that much in the high intensity zone. So these are different models out there. What does the evidence say in terms of their effectiveness? And so models like our polarized or pyramidal training have been shown to be more beneficial at improving speed, aerobic capacity, and performance than models which have a high focus on our middle zone training. So what this is saying is that higher amounts of low intensity aerobic work in zone 1 or 2, and less in our middle zone training or our threshold zone, and then a little bit in that high intensity zone. So our 80-20 is more effective typically than models which have significant amount in the middle zone. And there is science behind that and why, but many athletes are spending too much time in this middle zone. And the goal should be to try and spend, for endurance athletes, a significant part of your training in the lower heart rate zones below that V2-1 or the aerobic threshold, but still ensure you have sufficient amounts of high intensity training. So these are recommended by experts for runners, these lower heart rate models, and they have been shown to provide performance benefits. And I'll go explicitly into the degree of performance benefit in a moment, but it's particularly important for higher level and elite level athletes, but possibly less important for those starting out or at a recreational level. Doesn't mean it's not important, but possibly less important. Elite endurance runners have been shown to spend up to 71% of their training volume at that lower heart rate. And marathon runners who had faster times in a study spent greater amount of time in the lower heart rate zones than those with slower times. So there is some trend to go, well, yes, it's important. What does the actual science say in terms of the percentage of benefit? These couple of studies looked at recreational runners. So a lot of the people listening will fall into a recreational runner category or a sub-elite category. In recreational runners, polarized training, so this was our higher amount in our easier heart rate zones, up to 80%, compared to threshold training, elicited almost 2% higher performance benefit. Now, while that seems small, this is purely looking at performance only, and 2% can be significant when we put it in an endurance race event. This also doesn't consider fatigue. This doesn't consider injury or illness. So there are some more things there that are important. And in endurance athletes, including runners, so not just runners, polarized training had significantly better results than other training methods like our threshold training or our high intensity training. And it was found that polarized training increased your time to exhaustion in this study by 17.4%. And this was over 8% higher than other models. So there is some data to say, well, actually, this is significant. And this is something that we should consider in terms of our programming and how we put our plan together. But as you can see from that little snippet, it is quite an in-depth, detailed topic. I only gave you a really small sample there, and that was maybe even above some people's head or more information than some of you were interested in. So, like the strength training, I am going to be doing a specific workshop looking at types of running sessions, planning your running program. This is a great one for runners that want to learn more about it, but also running coaches. So keep an eye out for that one.